And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we begin the week the best way that we know how, and that is by talking IU and Big Ten basketball. So much going on in the world of IU and Big Ten basketball right now, and we're going to talk about it all. Mike DeCourcy is going to be here. Ryan Phillips will be here for a mailbag, so a jam-packed edition. A couple quick housekeeping notes off the top. Coming up this week, Assembly Call Radio on Thursday night, and then, of course, the IU Notre Dame postgame show on Saturday as soon as that game ends. Remember to keep SeatGeek in mind for tickets, whether you're trying to get last-minute Christmas presents or pick up tickets for the rest of Indiana's games, both in the non-conference, big game against Arkansas coming up soon, and then also for Big Ten play. Use the URL iutickets.shop. That'll take you right to the IU basketball page, and use that promo code ASSEMBLY to get $10 off. And then, of course, remember our friends at Home Field Apparel, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code ASSEMBLY20 to get 20% off the most comfortable and unique IU apparel anywhere. All right. And with that said, I am now pleased to welcome in for his regular segment from the Big Ten Network, the Sporting News, and Fox, one of the hardest working men in college hoops, the venerable Mike DeCourcy. And Mike is joining us from his home studio. And since he's associated with the Big Ten and he's at home, we know that he's winning. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great, Jerod. How are you?
I am doing very well, So, since the last time we talked, Indiana blew out Florida State, got blown out by Wisconsin, won a tough, ugly game at UConn, and then barely squeaked by Wisconsin, a team that was not supposed to have a pulse, but apparently does at home. So let me kind of phrase your Indiana discussion this way. Are you more optimistic or less optimistic about Indiana after the results of the last 2 weeks?
Well, I think I'm more optimistic for accounting reasons, because when we last spoke, they had played basically no high majors, and so therefore they had no high major wins. And now they've played four and have three. So more optimistic, but still confused about who they are or who they want to be. I like that they can be so many things. And I think when we talked on the podcast that I mentioned that I like the flexibility, the variability of what they can be. But I think the best teams figure out at least who their A game is, who their B game is, and what they might want to change into because of a particular opponent. But if you start getting into 5, 6, 7 different personalities, it becomes really hard to be good at any one of them. So you need to figure out who your not your five, but who your core is. And, I think that Arch is very enthusiastic about the fact that he can play so many guys and play so many different ways. But usually when teams play a lot of guys, it's because they're running and pressing. And they're not doing that. And they're basically playing pack line and they're, in their standard offense. And so they don't need 11 guys to play that way. And I'm not saying you can't play 11 like that, but I mean, when you think about it, I mean, on Friday night when they struggled so much and they had to go to overtime, I mean, Justin Smith only left the court for 5 minutes in the whole game. So that says something. I mean, that says that even though you got 11 guys sitting around, you got a couple that you got to have on the floor. And if you don't have them on the floor, then you don't feel comfortable. Well, that's a start, but I still think you need to develop an identity of what you want to be at your best. This is who we want to be. This is what you practice to get to be. And I haven't really seen yet what they want that to be. And I think part of the reason we haven't seen that is because they can't get 5 guys to play consistently on defense together. And so that becomes, okay, then what we got to do some other things so that we can be good enough to win this game.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a huge issue because Archie Miller clearly wants a program defined by defense, and right now the defense is very much a weak link, as we saw against Nebraska. We all hope that getting Rob Finney back will help to shore up some of the perimeter defense issues, but the problems seem to run deeper than just one guy. And that really leads into my next question, which is that Nebraska really seemed to show a formula that is going to be difficult for Indiana to contend with, which is to spread out the floor on offense, pack the paint on defense. How would you expect or would you suggest Archie Miller try to adjust, given the personnel that he has, as the scouting report starts to become more standard for this Indiana group?
Well, I would start by saying that spread out the floor on defense should not, on offense, the opposing team spreading out the floor on offense should not be a problem for this Indiana team. There's no reason in the world why Al Durham struggled as much against the bounce as he did on Friday night. He's too dynamic as a player, and he certainly got solid length. So there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to guard a dribbler, but he really struggled with it. Rob is supposed to be a very good on-ball defender. When you're going against a perimeter that has three guys that can bounce it, you're only as good. Your defense is only as good as the weakest guy against the bounce. I mean, it's really that simple. When Kentucky played last year in the Elite Eight, and they were going against Auburn's two great guards, whoever they switched Tyler Hero onto went off. And Ashton Hagens wasn't great, but he was fine. And so the guy who Hero would defend would go score 10 points in a row. And then they'd move him onto the other guy, and that guy would score 10 points in a row. And so that, if Rob is an improvement in what you have against the ball, that's good. But if you have a team like Nebraska that's willing to let any of its three perimeter guys drive it, then all three guys have to be able to stand up the ball, and the help has to be good. And there are a lot of different factors, especially when you're playing a defense that's designed to be tight. And that's where the post comes back into play. Joey Brunk is so skilled as an offensive player, and he's got very good feet, but defensively his positioning is inconsistent, and he gets the team into trouble sometimes with that. And he proved himself so valuable on offense, especially in the second half against UConn, but at other times in the Nebraska game as well, he did some really nice things. But if Joey were standing up defensively and playing good position defense and playing good ball screen defense to a lesser extent, those things are things that you can keep him in the game and get everything he has to give you. But right now, that's problematic. De'Ron's not really an answer there either. And so they continue to look for somebody or to try to get the guys that they really want to play those minutes to handle the interior. Again, you don't have to necessarily be this elite shot blocker, but you have to play good position defense so that the guy inside isn't getting easy touches and then being able to roll into either hand to score.
What about on the other end, offensively for Indiana? Obviously, getting to the free throw line, crashing the offensive glass, the 2-point field goal percentage has all been good, but especially in these Big Ten games, Indiana's really struggled from the outside. How do you see that as we go forward this year?
Well, I think first of all, it's good that they're getting good shots. I mean, I think that a lot of the shots that they've missed have been quality shots. I think there have been some. We talked again on the podcast about certain circumstances in which guys hunted shots. And that, I think that because there's so many guys that are rolling through the lineup, sometimes guys start to think, well, I've been out here for 3 minutes and I'm probably about due to hit the bench. So maybe I ought to get one up here before I go. And I'm not saying that's exactly what motivates Indiana's guys at the times when they take subpar shots. But that is a tendency in some circumstances. So you have to be sure.
Probably what I'd be thinking if I was a player.
Yes. But you can't have that. And so there was, like I said, there were one or two instances, particularly in the UConn game, where I saw guys that were chasing shots, and that this team can't ever have that happen, because again, most of the time you've got 5 guys on the floor who can put the ball in the basket from somewhere. And some teams are going to have maybe 3 that, you don't ever want the other guy to take anything other than you're wide open underneath, the ball falls into your hands, then you can put it back. Otherwise, make sure that somebody else gets it. That's college basketball. There's a lot of teams out there like that. But there aren't too many rotations where Indiana says that to any of its guys. Because if they're taking shots from the right place after the right offensive action, second side, third side, wide open, no closeout. obviously something that opens clear in the lane. I mean, although all those circumstances, there isn't anybody on this team you'd say don't take that shot. So what they have to become is more consistent in terms of their execution. And I think that comes back to Rob being a full-time player. I think he's got to start. I think he has to enter the starting lineup so that you can start to get the ball flowing in the direction that you want. I love Devontae. I love Al. Neither one of those guys is a point guard. They can play it, but they're not. I mean, it's one thing to be able to take the ball because Finney is in foul trouble. And okay, so we got to trust you for this time. But that's not who they are. And so they don't open the game necessarily with a full understanding of how to get the offense to where it needs to be. Both of those guys are where it needs to be in certain circumstances. So you got to get Rob into the starting lineup and let him do his deal. And I think that to an extent, what we see over the next couple of weeks will give them that occasion. Now, I mean, somewhat that depends on what kind of fight Notre Dame puts up, you know, how much of an opportunity that is for them to get better, and how much of an opportunity is like the Nebraska game was. Let's just get this one in the books, man, get it as a W and move on. That all depends on how sharp Notre Dame is. They've had games where they were awful and games where they were really good. And so, you know, obviously it's your job to make them look bad.
Yep. Let's talk about the Big Ten. Start out with power rankings. Do you want to just go Michigan State first, 12 teams tied for second, and then Northwestern? Or
I thought maybe we could just make them all. Yeah, make them all, since they're all basically the same team, home and road. You know.
Yeah, no kidding.
Ohio State is number one. Although, you know, it's funny because I heard so many people. You know, and of course I don't talk about the polls, so it wasn't me. I can swear to that. But so many of my colleagues in the media, Ohio State has to be number one on Monday morning, you know, or Monday afternoon. They have to be number one. It'd be ridiculous to keep KU and jump them up just because they were number two. No one remembered that no one wins on the road in the Big Ten, man. Right now, it doesn't happen.
Literally.
Yes, it does not. It's amazing. It's an amazing stat because, you know, I mean, that was my first occasion to see Nebraska, and I was going to check the Creighton game out, and you know they didn't give me a reason, as everyone knows, and so that this became my first chance to really get a good look at them, and they certainly don't have enough guys, but the guys they have aren't bad, and because of the way they played in that game, it worked because they I don't know if that was the way they had designed it up all year, but all those ISOs they did, it worked really well for them. And they played good team basketball, and they made it hard to play against them. And then, of course, they carried that into the home Purdue game as well. So you're looking at other than Nebraska, all the teams you looked at them and said, well, I like that guy and I like that guy, and he's a good player. And then you watch them play some Northwestern kicking the heck out of Providence. You thought, well, at their absolute best, they can be a threat. But that every single team at home has won and every single team on the road has lost is astonishing. Because remember, that's pretty much everybody, except like you said, Michigan State's only one hasn't been on the road so far. So that's everybody 1-13.
Let me ask you a question about, do you think that there is something unique going on about that? Or is this just kind of noisy data in a small sample size at the beginning of a long season? Like, are we going to look back on this and it's just like, oh yeah, you know, that was crazy, but it normalized? Or is there something unique about this?
It's always been harder to win on the road in the Big Ten than most conferences because most of the time the crowds are great. I mean, there are places you can go. Boston College, when's the last time they had a great crowd? I mean, that's, you know, Florida State, a terrific program that often has not drawn well. Now, obviously, when they get Duke in there, I mean, they fill it up, but often not that tough to play against. And now the team they're terrific, and they may derive great confidence from playing at home, but the crowd doesn't make it the issue. And there are other places around the country in major conferences where that's the case, but that's not the case really almost anywhere in the Big Ten. Big Ten has always been, it's been the attendance leader in college basketball for like 25, 28 years, probably pretty much however long they've been counting.
Mm-hmm.
you go on the road in the Big Ten, and first of all, you're in for it with the crowd, and I think also, like I said, I mean, like Minnesota last night. I mean, I love Gabe Kalsher as a player. I love Daniel Atoru. Marcus Carr has really given them something. They got 5 guys that anybody would be happy to have on their team. Now, they may not be 1 to 5 on everybody's team, but all those guys can play. So so you get them in an environment where they're confident, excited, and a couple of shots drop, and the couple of the other guys shots don't, and all of a sudden things start to go their way. So I think by the time we get to the end of this season, it will have normalized. I mean, Ohio State's going to be Ohio State and Maryland and Michigan State and Indiana, and whoever, if Purdue straightens their deal out. I mean, they're all going to be up toward the top, and then there's certain teams that are going to be down toward the bottom, and then the fight is going to be, trying to be 8, trying to be 7, because that's where somewhere in there that line will be drawn, and below you won't make it. So I think that we'll see it normalize in terms of overall records, but I do think that it always has been difficult to win on the road in this league, and I don't see that changing this year.
From these first 2 games of the Big Ten season, what players or teams really stood out the most to you?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that I think Caleb Wesson's had some really impressive performances. Georgie Bashanishvili, I some of the stuff that they did with the high-low with him and Kofi Coburn, really impressive. Georgie had 2 of the best plays I've seen all year. One was a ridiculous dunk, and I would never have known. I mean, I've watched him play like for a year and a half now. I had no idea he had hops like that. I mean, he was like James Worthy. That's what he reminded me of when he came in with the one hand. Only difference was James did it with the right hand. It was an amazing dunk. And then a great play not long after that in the Michigan game, where Ayo Dosunmu came down the right side, where he really likes that right-hand drive down the right side of the lane. But he got closed out, and I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Isaiah that came up and closed, and I tipped it, and it tipped high. It didn't go, it wasn't a rejection. Livers tipped it, and it floated. And so it floats up, and it's going to land about 2 feet short of the rim. And Georgie comes flying in to grab it and lays it in. And there was no reason in the world why he should have known to be there, except that he's Georgie. So love what he's doing, and really have been impressed by that. And then Anthony Cowan. Anthony has been, honestly, I always liked him as a player and thought he was a really first-rate Big Ten point guard. He's playing like an All-American, and I don't think I ever thought he had that. He's just been so consistent. He's really expanded his range while everyone else is struggling to shoot consistently from 21 and a half or whatever the distance is exactly now, 22. They've changed it so many times. I used to know 19.9, that was like one of those things I remembered like my birthday. And they've changed it so many times since that now I don't know the exact number anymore. But others are struggling to shoot from there while he's out there shooting from 24 feet with ease and comfort. He's been terrific.
You mentioned earlier, kind of this discussion about how Ohio State, had to be number 1. And we got a listener question for you about that from Patrick, who said he'd love to hear you discuss the nuances of how national media members perceive teams and then vote on a weekly basis for the top 25. Because as he said last week, quite a few ranked teams lost, which contributed to multiple bad losses for those ranked teams, and where they are in the ranking. So what is your perception of how that works?
Oh man, it's such an interesting concept. I first of all, I don't understand why anybody votes. It's if you're doing it right, it's a lot of work, and they don't pay you. Like if they paid you, it would make sense, right? Like if they threw you a few bucks a week, you'd be like, okay, I'm into that. I mean, that's another way to make a buck. And I don't know how it's like 18, 20 weeks in the poll. They buy a Christmas present or two, but they don't. They just want you to volunteer. So I think everybody that does it is nuts. That's first. Second, but in terms of how they do it, I think they try. The ones who are conscientious, and I don't know what the number of that is, I think they try to evaluate based on resume and what you've accomplished. And, some of that is how little you've lost, and some of that is how much you've won, and some of it's who you beat and how you beat them, and some of it's who you lost to and how you lost to them. But it's obviously, because everybody plays disparate schedules, it's hard to always measure that. It's really difficult, especially early in the year. And the reason I know that it's too much work to not get paid for is that in the early 90s, I did it because it seemed like an honor. And I thought it was. And so I did it for a couple of years. And the second year I did it, I was the year that LaSalle had Lionel Simmons as a player of the year candidate. And they had like 3-4 pros on their team, and they were rolling through their league. Now, they were in the Metro Atlantic then. It was better then than it is now, but it still was the Metro Atlantic. It wasn't the Big Ten or the Big East. But they were a fabulous team. They were tremendous. And they were like 20 whatever and one. And it wasn't a year when there were a lot of great teams that were obviously, above everybody. Maybe it was 91. I can't remember exactly. But whatever that year was, I kept voting them number one every week. And so it would be like whoever was number one that was like 26, 20 and 6 or 25 and 3 or whatever they were. And then there'd be LaSalle somewhere down around 6th or 7th, and that little one in parentheses, and that was me. And when they had a reunion for the team, I wrote a note to their SID, and I said, I'm insulted I'm not invited because I voted for you guys. I was one every week. But it's frustrating because that kind of achievement, it's really hard to get people to pay attention to it. Murray State, 2012, when they went undefeated all the way to like February 20th or whatever. If you watched them play, you knew how good they were. Now, were they better than Duke or whoever? No, but they were 28-1 or 28. No, excuse me. Why can't you vote them number one just until they lose? Can't really? Because it would undignify the poll. See, that's the kind of thing. And Gonzaga has superseded that because even though their league's not great, they've proven it by, like, just in the last couple of weeks, they've gone out and beat Washington and Arizona and somebody else, and they play Carolina this week. And so they played those kind of people. So for the most part, people don't hold it against them any longer for their schedule. But it's really hard for great teams. Wichita a few years ago when they went 2014, when they went all the way to basically the tournament without losing.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to get the recognition they deserve, and that frustrates me.
Last question for you, Mike. This may shock you to learn, but Indiana fans had very strong reactions to the Nebraska game. Some were happy that Indiana got the win. Some very upset with how Indiana played despite getting the win. Lots of strong reactions out there. Some more reasonable than others, let's say. And, it's interesting following you on Twitter because you're a Steelers fan. And so I see you talking about the Steelers, which is actually a team that you root for. So I've seen you going back and forth with Steelers fans on Twitter. And here's a question that I want to ask you just from a philosophical standpoint about how you use social media. Do you think that it is useful for people with platforms like, you have with, obviously in sports and with Steelers and like we have with Indiana? Do you think it's useful to engage with and highlight the extreme or ill-informed opinions on Twitter? Or are we amplifying voices that don't deserve it? And in the process, kind of making the fan reaction, quote unquote, seem more extreme and unreasonable than it really is. Because I feel like sometimes those minority voices on Twitter that are very angry, very loud, you kind of want to point out why they're being so ridiculous. But I sometimes wonder if it would be better to just ignore them altogether.
Well, I think if the problem with ignoring them, unless they're profane or whatever, or offensive or, that sort of thing. The problem with ignoring, if they're just talking football in my case, or talking hoops and, and like, I wouldn't, unless someone came to me in basketball, for the most, now I will do some, but because because the Steelers are something that I'm passionate about, I feel comfortable saying, this is a wrong approach. And in basketball, usually it's if somebody comes to me and drops a take on my doorstep that I think is inaccurate, that's usually when I'll respond. But I think the value in responding is that for the most part, if someone puts something out on Twitter, like the idea that Duck Hodges was asked to throw too many passes on Sunday night, and that's the reason the Steelers lost. If somebody puts that out there, then somebody else might come, like does a search on Duck Hodges and then sees, well, this guy thinks the same way I do, so I must be right. So if I come in and say, here's why you're wrong, then there's a very good chance that they'll see that instead. And they'll be like, ooh, I never thought about it that way. So that's kind of why I feel like either, on the things that I have some expertise on, and I do feel like I have expertise on the Steelers, not what Ed Bouchette from The Athletic has, been covering them for 35 years, but more than a lot of people do. Or it's certainly in college basketball, where I'm comfortable, pointing out where people are, engaging in collective groupthink. Yeah, I think that one example of that would be the 2017 national championship game, where people were outraged because they were calling too many fouls. And my response to that common assertion was, here's the thing. If they don't commit that many fouls, they won't call them. So don't foul. But that, people let them play. Well, do you want them to break the rules as they play, or do you want to call the rules as they're written and therefore allow those who are playing fairly to succeed? So that's an example of where I would chip in and say, this is why you're wrong. And so, like Friday night, it was a frustrating game for Indiana. I totally get that, especially because what are some of the things I talked about before, the inability to handle those ISO dribbles and how much that damaged the Indiana defense. And then also, after they had been damaged in that way for so many times, and here they are, they got a chance to close it out. They're up 3. They carry the ball, not carry it, but advance the ball over to the sideline. The clock hits 3.5, 4 seconds. They are inviting you to foul them. And no, we're just going to play it out. I can see where that would frustrate, because that was the wrong choice. You should have fouled them. Because they began the possession with a lot of time, if they chuck it at 12 and they make it, okay, we're either going overtime or we got a shot to win this now. But when they hold it and whatever else happened, but they brought the ball over to in front of their bench, and we're not in position to shoot yet, and there was 3.5, 4 seconds on the clock. They're inviting you to foul and you don't foul. That's a tactical mistake. I mean, I don't know what Arch's basic premise is on that, because I haven't seen a lot of circumstances where they were leading by 3. I mean, a year ago, they didn't have many leads down the stretch. But I know his brother fouls on that every time, because they got beat at Xavier on one of those in the NCAA tournament 2007.
Yeah,
he had Greg Oden's team beat, and they didn't foul, and Ron Lewis put in a 3 from the top of the key, and they went home, and Indiana went to the championship game. So I know Sean fouls every time. I was surprised that Arch, doing a lot of the things that Sean does, wasn't in, and having worked with him for so long, wasn't in that camp, at least not in that circumstance.
We talked about that on the postgame show. It was actually surprising to see Archie at one point basically turn to the bench and ask, what are we going to do, as if they didn't have the plan set. He mentioned in the postgame that was their plan to foul, and they just didn't get it communicated. So
okay, well, that explains it.
They have a plan for it, but they just didn't execute it.
Yeah, when you have 12 seconds left, it is in that fuzzy gray area, and if you don't have a time or a stoppage to communicate that, it can be hard, because again, you don't want to foul at 12, because then you're free throwing back and forth, and soon enough you don't even have a 3-point lead.
Yeah.
But if your guys should know going into a situation like that, that should be a situation that they understand. If it gets down to a certain figure, now Sean fouls even earlier than that. That's where I kind of part with him. I'm a below 5 second guy. If you get below 5 and you're not in position to shoot, do it. I've seen him foul at 6 or 7. So that's a circumstance where I thought that I was really surprised that they didn't, because it was such an open invitation when the ball was over by the right sideline.
Yeah.
They didn't shoot it until they got it back up to the wing. So that would be an example where, if, I could see where fans would get frustrated by that, because once you got in overtime and you hadn't played great, so very easily could have gone the opposite way. But once you win a game, you try to learn from it. You try to use what you got, use the mistakes you made. And like I said, Al Durham got to guard the dribble better. There's no reason in the world why you should be so, easily knocked off stride. And what I mean by that is one ball fake, one step fake, and you're like diving. Really? You're that afraid of your interior defense that you gotta bounce back that far because the guy made one hard move to look like he was driving, and then he steps back into a shot. How many times are you gonna let that happen? So those are the kinds of things that you learned from Friday night and fixed. Much better to learn from a win than from a loss. And that is a universal truth in sports.
Amen to that. Mike, we always appreciate your time. And now we will part, and I think we're all rooting for Northwestern tonight, simply to see the most symmetrical Big Ten standings of all time. Everybody at 1-1. I feel like that would just be the perfect way to enter the Big Ten season. Just a clean slate.
Don't put it past them. They at their best, they're hard to play against. They don't defend great, but they can't, and they don't shoot great, but they can run really good offense and they can get hot. So you never know.
Go do it, Northwestern. We're all behind you.
Enjoy.
Thanks, Mike. We'll talk to you. No Banner Monday next week for Christmas, and then I think we'll do it the week after if you're available.
I will look forward to it, Jerod. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Okay, the great Mike DeCourcy. We always appreciate him coming on and joining us on Mondays. Great insight there on the Hoosiers. And let's now bring in Ryan Phillips for the mailbag. I know we've got about 20 minutes with him, so we want to get right to it and get to some of these questions. A lot of good questions came in. And, we had a little bit of breaking news happen today, which I'm sure that you all know by now. Indiana Athletic Director Fred Glass kind of surprised a lot of people by announcing that he is retiring as an athletic director. So, Ryan, I guess let's start out before we get into the questions. What was your initial reaction to hearing the news about Fred Glass?
Surprise. If he was announcing now that he'd be done at the end of the year, end of the school year, not the school semester, that would have been interesting. But he's out pretty quick. And
well, he said he's staying on till the end of the year, right?
Oh, he's staying on till the end of the year? I thought he meant the end of the calendar year.
No, the end of the bicentennial. So I think it'll be until
okay. Then that doesn't surprise me as much. No, I had seen it actually tweeted twice that he was leaving at the end of the year, meaning calendar year, and that shocked the heck out of me. I don't think but that doesn't seem right because they would never announce
that was not my understanding.
Yeah, that would not
at conclusion of academic year.
Okay,
yeah, it's academic.
Good, because I saw two people tweet out that he was done and leaving, and these are the kind of things where if it's really a retirement, they give you a long lead. You would say it if you were leaving in December, you'd say it in August. Give them a long lead time to search for a new athletic director, all that stuff. Look, I think Fred Glass has done some really good things as the athletic director. I think he's done he's fallen short in some areas. He probably it felt like he held on to Tom Crean a little long. I know they won the Big Ten title, sort of towards the end of Crean's tenure, but it felt like that was falling apart for a long time. I think that a lot of people were satisfied with the coaching search and finding Archie Miller. But it's also a situation where it feels like the basketball program hasn't advanced. Is everything you could possibly give to this basketball program being given with the facilities and all that? It seems that way. It doesn't seem like people are complaining about shortcomings in that area. The football program has certainly advanced under his watch. It took a while, but it's finally looking like there's some traction forward and there's been some investment there. Baseball program has certainly been outstanding under his watch. I think some of that credit goes to Rick Greenspan for getting the approval for the new stadium under his watch. A couple of these things, you have to kind of combine with other people because Rick Greenspan, I know he has a lot of detractors who look back at his tenure negatively, and I understand why. but he also brought in Terry Hepner, who was a positive for IU athletics. And he was the guy who got the agreement for all the new facilities, the Cook Hall. He actually got the board of trustees to sign off on a new basketball arena that never got built. He got them to sign off on,
much to your chagrin.
I know. He got them to sign off on finishing enclosing the football stadium and building the new baseball, softball complex. Those things. Those are enormous investments. And I think that Fred has run with those. I think the women's basketball program is in a lot better shape than when Fred showed up. Soccer has continued to be a perennial, national title contender, and they're going to get a renovation to the facility from what I understand. So, there's a lot of positives in the IU athletic department. The problem is that the superstar program on campus still can't sort of get out of its own way. And we'll see. It's early in the season. Maybe that's the kind of thing where in his swan song, we'll finally see this blossom. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly, as with any athletic director, I think nationally, there's positives and negatives to take away. Nobody's perfect. I think that he can look back with pride on some things. The Athletes' Bill of Rights, I think, was the right thing to do as well.
Agreed.
It's something that not a lot of schools do, and I think that it's a credit to Indiana that they did it. So positives and negatives, and we'll see who they bring in. I mean, it's the kind of thing where everybody thinks there's a better athletic director out there. Then you get that athletic director and you can judge. It's everybody thinks there's somebody better out there, and everybody thinks there's a better coach out there. Unless you're Alabama football, everyone thinks, at least a few times a year, well, there's a better coach out there we could go get. Or
Alabama fans are probably thinking that right now.
Well, they have their doubts after Auburn, but it's the kind of thing where we will see what people think. I know there's people who look at Glass's tenure negatively. People look at it positively, but I think that there certainly are positives and negatives to take away. Where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I think he did a really good job overall. I think it's, I've had this conversation with some people that, if you were going to grade him, it would be very difficult to give him higher than like a B plus simply because the basketball program is lagging. And
the superstar program on campus is lagging.
Yeah, but so many other things that he's done have really been good. And I really like the priority that he made putting student athletes first. I think, the sign that he has on his door, Mike Miller tweeted it out, etched into the glass. It said, "The director of athletics can always be interrupted for a student athlete." And I just think that ethos, I think, is a really good one. And,
and you don't see a lot of it in college sports.
No. And branding the Indiana University Athletic Department as one that puts student athlete welfare first, that I look at things differently now. I look at things as a parent so much more now. And I look at some of the things that they've done.
There we go.
No, but
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's like, you think about that and it's like, well, I would really feel good about sending my kid to a place like Indiana because that there's not going to be tolerance for athletes not being taken care of. Now, in some ways.
Let me say something real quick about the student athlete welfare. You saw it this weekend in the Heisman Trophy speech where Joe Burrow talked about Ed Orgeron at LSU and how he puts the players first. And when Ed Orgeron was at USC, it was the same thing. All of those players said, we want to play for him because he cares about us more than he cares about himself or his contract or any of that stuff. If you want an athletic department that appeals to kids, make it about them, not about you running them or I'm your coach. You hear a lot of guys say that. Like it's not your like the basketball team at IU is not Archie Miller's team. It's those players' team. He's the one guiding it. And you could say that he's almost like he's a teammate who's in charge. I mean, that's really the way to look at it. And people always talk about Bobby Knight's teams, Bobby Knight's this, those teams that belongs to those players.
But that's the culture of college sports where
I agree
coaches
with
are lionized.
And I agree. And you're right. And it's the way the public views it, but it shouldn't be the way it's viewed internally. It should be about the athletes first. And I completely agree with you on that. And I just thought it was.
To be clear, it's not about coddling athletes.
No.
Because, I think having discipline as a through line through your program and demanding excellence from them is the best way to make it a player's program. But it's making sure that their welfare as human beings is also taken care of at the same time. And I think Indiana has done that. And so, you could say, the quote unquote culture of compliance and some of these other things, has it maybe made it harder for Indiana to build a winner in certain sports where we know that, you might need to get some things done? Yeah, it probably has. But I think that's something that most Indiana fans like, and it's a pillar that they want their sports programs to be built on. And I think Fred understood that. And I applaud him for it. And I think in all of those ways, he did a really good job. And so
I agree. I think that's a fair assessment. And as I said, I was watching the Heisman Trophy ceremony, and just that struck me as that was the thing that the kid got so emotional over, was that his coach cared about him. And it wasn't just a jersey number. He actually invested in his players, and that's the way you should set up your entire athletic program. And there are a number of programs who do that, and Indiana isn't the only one. But if you want to compete at the highest level, it's harder to do that. It's harder to treat players as people and not, production numbers and things like that. And you have to keep that in mind.
So now it'll be interesting to see, can they find someone that can build upon those things that Fred Glass did, and
get
also
a new arena built. And
it's interesting. We'll have plenty more to talk about that. Obviously, some names have been bandied about for potential replacements, but
sure.
We'll talk about that more as that search moves on. Let's hit a couple.
Let's
of these
talk
questions.
about Nebraska, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah, you weren't on that. That's right. You weren't on the postgame show. All right, you wanna provide some thoughts?
I did rewatch it, and I watched about the first half while we were driving down to the arena. I just had it on in the car, and then watched the second half and overtime later. A lot of ugliness. A lot of guys shooting shots they shouldn't shoot. Armand Franklin and Demezy Anderson and Justin Smith combined to go 0 of 9 from 3-point range. Not exactly what I'd love to see. Justin Smith shooting 27% from 3-point range. He shouldn't be firing off shots like that. Armand Franklin, not a 3-point shooter. He's shooting 14% from 3. Demezy has hit some, but he should also know that if he misses 2, he probably shouldn't shoot a third, unless he's standing by himself wide open with no, alone in the gym. And if that's the case, you should probably drive to the rim. But I just thought that was what struck me the most, was guys just taking really bad shots, and shots that they know they shouldn't take. Think about it this way. They were 5 of 25 from 3 and still shot 47.1% from the field. That should tell you something. You're better at shooting 2s than you are at shooting 3s. Go shoot a 2 or get fouled, because they also shot 71% from the free throw line and made 27 of 38. That's what it told me. I'm not dogging those guys who played, but know your role, and Armand Franklin's role is not to fire 4 3-pointers in a game. It just isn't. He's not there yet. I hope he gets there eventually, but he's not there yet. So just, and I'm not trying to pick on him. He's just an example of, the thinking process in the game for those guys. And I also thought, look, on the positive side, Rob Finney looks like he's back and really finished strong. And, if you get that out of him every game, this team's going to win more games than it's going to lose.
Yeah. And, of course, the perception of that Nebraska game has changed some with the fact that they beat the pants off Purdue at home. It certainly seems like Nebraska kind of came into that with everybody thinking, do they even have a pulse? And clearly they do. But, a lot of warts for Indiana to clean up. But as Mike said, it's good to learn those lessons in a win. And that's,
by the way, also, when is Nebraska dumped in 12 3-pointers in a game this season? They weren't shooting very well coming in. And is it me, or does Hoiberg's team play a lot like Green's team did? That really high spread the floor, shoot a lot of 3s, drive and kick. That was basically like watching an Indiana Green team. It really was.
And it absolutely was the perfect offense to run against our defense where it is right now, with our inability to control the point of attack. So it's going to put a lot of things on film for Archie to teach this team with. And now they've got a full week, and you're sitting at 10-1. So even with all the issues that there have been, still a really good start overall for Indiana. Now if they can, get Rob healthy, and hopefully everybody else is healthy, and you learn from it, obviously still a lot of big opportunities in front of this Indiana team.
I missed Devontae only played 15 minutes. Did he get hurt?
Yeah, I have not.
I know
been
he'd been
able to
hobbled
tell-
coming in.
I have not been able to tell if he had an Achilles issue before the game or if he hurt it during the game, but there's something going on with his Achilles.
Okay.
I've tried to talk to some people and I haven't gotten like anything kind of definitive on how healthy he is, but it's definitely a bit of a concern that's lingering.
He's been struggling for a
mind.
while. I know he's been
Yes.
hobbled for a while.
Yes,
So.
and I don't think those struggles are just Devontae being Devontae because he hasn't quite looked right physically. Now, some of it is, because some of the shots he's taken and some of the decisions he's made hasn't been good. But I'll be very interested to see that. What is his availability and what's his health like Saturday against Notre Dame?
I also saw that Joey Brunk led the team with 4 turnovers. I don't think I want to know. Do I?
No, you don't.
Okay.
You don't. Just leave it there.
Yep.
Leave it there. Okay, so someone mentioned in the chat, why is the pack line not functional at IU, which leads us into one of the other questions that we got from Jack, which is sometimes I wonder if our team, other than Rob, really understands what in-your-face defense really is. Maybe Archie should show the guys films of the type of defense the 75, 76, and 81 teams played. What do you think? I think if you put Quinn Buckner and Bobby Wilkerson at the top of this defense, it'd be awesome. So to this specific question, why is the pack line not functional? And it has been at times. This team has played really, really good defense. Why is it struggling in particular this year? I think there's 2 reasons. One is Indiana's inability at the point of attack. Like, Rob is a good on-ball defender. Al Durham, God love him, it feels like he's playing defense on his heels a lot more this season than what we've seen. And so he's struggling to contain dribblers. Armand, I think, has potential to be a really good defender. He's just a little bit inconsistent now. And Devontae has been up and down, in part, I think, because some of the injuries he's dealt with, and in part because he's kind of an up-and-down player. And then, when you have guys like Demezi and Jerome on the wings, they're trying, and they're better, but they're still vulnerable. Yeah. So when you have that on the
inability to stop the dribble is the answer.
It puts you into constant rotation, and the pack line, like, that is a fundamental principle. It's the first thing that has to happen in the pack line. And then the other thing is you've had some inconsistency with your post guys. Joey Brunk is still kind of learning, and we've talked a lot about his issues with hedging. And Archie even talked about with Trace, he's got to be a guy who doesn't coast on defense. He's got to pay attention more to the details, and he's still learning the system. So I think those 2 issues are creating issues at the point of attack and then issues with help and rotations that other teams are just picking apart right now. And so both of them are going to need to get fixed for this defense to kind of be the solid, cohesive unit that it needs to be. So the pack line itself can work. It's not like now the 3-point line is extended a little bit and the pack line is obsolete. Right now, our guys just aren't executing. There haven't really been any types of adjustments. And it's just something that's going to have to get better. Individual players are going to have to improve, and the coach may have to make some adjustments if they don't. That, to me, is where we're at with the defense.
No, I mean, that's fair. I just think it's the inability to stop the dribble. And then, the tenet of the pack line is that you have help off the dribble. Well, when you have help, but the guy is piercing the defense deeper than he should be, that leaves more room for the help to rotate to his guy, and then more room for that help to rotate to his guy. And it's a cumulative domino effect. You've got to stop the ball, as you said, at the point of attack or at the crease where the offense wants to drive in.
Yeah. And, I saw someone here, I have my doubts about the pack line. I do too, but it's in this vein. I have doubts about the pack line. If you're going to run it, you've got to be committed to it. You've got to recruit to it, and you've got to build your program around it, which means you need guys who can do all the things we just talked about in their skill set, and you need guys who stick around and are old. This Indiana team still is working in a bunch of new players. Like, we haven't reached that point where we've gotten old and are going to stay old yet, and I feel like you need that for the pack line to be successful. Now, should it be like that in year 3? That's a fair discussion. I think that's why we're all a little bit frustrated, but that's still why I'm not yet ready to just pin it on the type of defense. Our program still isn't ready to run it the right way, unfortunately, and there are different reasons for blame there. That's a different conversation. But if it comes just to the defense, I think you got to at least be fair that
any system when run correctly works.
Yes.
Any system when run correctly works. It's whether it's the motion offense, whether it's, a zone defense, whatever. If you run it the right way, it can't be beat. That's why they made the system. But the key is offense is going to try and find holes in your system, and you have to outsmart the offense or just beat the offense straight up. I mean, that's the way it works. Everybody runs versions of the exact same thing. It's about who runs it the best.
Yeah. And to Joel's point in the chat, has Al ever guarded the other team's number one? No. The pack line is not going to work if Al Durham is your lead defender out front. It doesn't fit his strengths, his skill set as a basketball player.
That's why you need Rob Finney.
Right. And so those criticisms of Al, in part, he's in a position to not succeed, but he still has to get better too because he's the guy running it right now. So there's nuance.
There's layers to it, folks.
There are layers to it, and there's no simple answer except for, Rob Finney come back and just guard all three ball handlers. He can do that, right? I know you need to get out of here. Can you take another question?
Yeah. I got 10 minutes.
Okay, so from JD, he says, I like predictive analytics, but do we overrate their importance game to game, especially early in the season? Teams can definitely get better or at least play on the higher end. Nebraska being the obvious example, do we occasionally forget that these are games played by human beings, not robots?
Yes.
I've thought about this a lot since the Nebraska game, actually.
These are human beings, and also early in the season, predictive analytics, the sample size is small. So, nobody knew that Nebraska had the ability to come out and nail that many three-pointers or do whatever they did because they hadn't shown it yet. But that doesn't mean they can't do it. So I think that on a year-long trend, predictive analytics are pretty good.
Yeah. Game
to game, anything can happen. But again, trends, but it's always funny when KenPom says IU is favored to win by 6 or whatever, and people take that to the bank. It's like, no. By predictive analytics say that, but who knows what's going to happen during the day? A guy could get hurt during the game, or a guy could, just have a bad day. His girlfriend could break up with him the night before and he doesn't get any sleep. And then he comes out and misses all his shots. These are human beings. And so I think that looking at it on a game to game basis is kind of, you can get a sense, but you can't predict things on it. Year long, the trends I think are very, very valuable though.
Yeah, as I said, I've thought about this a lot since the Nebraska game, because we entered that with a certain set of expectations because Nebraska was sub 150 and they hadn't really been playing well. And so you look at it and you set your baseline kind of expectation for what's going to be success at a certain point, and it's funny, I saw a couple of people tweet that they had, taken their kids to the game, and you see these pictures of these 6-7-year-old kids going to the game. And I was thinking, I was like, man, back when I was going to the games with my dad, if I had gone to this game, I would have been ecstatic that Indiana won, had fun watching a really exciting game, and I wouldn't have thought about the fact that, Indiana didn't play very well because Nebraska isn't a good team. And granted, that would have been an overly simplistic way to look at it. I'm not saying that some of the critiques of Indiana aren't warranted. They are. But as I reflect on how we approach that post-game show, I will say one thing I wish we had done more of is acknowledge that the game didn't go how we expected, how we wanted, either our expectations or even the coaches and the players' expectations. It went totally haywire, and that team still rallied together and found a way to win it. And that should have been given more credit.
Relying on its two most important players, too, if you notice that. And that's how often have, Finney and Trace Jackson Davis spent time on the court together this year, let alone led Indiana to a win. I thought that was the biggest development for me in that overtime was that Rob Finney took over, and so did Trace Jackson Davis. Those were the two guys that they relied on.
And that Demezy Anderson was a gold jersey winner on the court at the end of the game and made hustle plays and made free throws. So that's the thing. And so I think that's what's important to keep in mind on an individual game basis. Anything can happen, and you've got to go with the game that was played. Now, yes, in a macro sense, you want to look at the trends, and that's something that we try and do here is how did what we saw tonight project forward and what improvements need to be made and all of those things. And I think those are totally fair angles to take. But I do agree with some of those folks who have pointed out that, more credit should have been given for winning the damn game. Because ultimately that's the name of the game, and that game went haywire. And it's, so many warts, but they won. And
it was a Big Ten win.
Good things to take out of it. So,
yeah. You bank a Big Ten win.
You sure do.
That's what you take away from it. And you take away all the negative play that you're going to put on film and get to learn from. But yeah, anytime you get a win in the Big Ten, I know this is not 1970, 1980s Indiana. This conference is a lot tougher top to bottom than it used to be. Just there's more talent, there's better coaching, there's all of that stuff, and there's more money involved, which means that you're going to get better coaching, better, player development systems, everything, everywhere. And so games are tougher on a night-to-night basis than they used to be when all of the recruits were concentrated at 12 schools. I mean, it's a different world. So these games are going to be tough every night. And I think the Big Ten Conference is a lot deeper than people thought it would be at the beginning of the year. I think they thought the top about 6 would be real good. And now we're looking at a situation where the bottom feeders are beating the top tier teams early in the season, and people are shocked.
Yeah. Now, Hoosiers better play better because
they got to play better.
It's definitely fair that I think if they had played that way against 12 other Big Ten teams, they probably lose.
Sure.
If they play that way Saturday, they're going to lose to Notre Dame. So hopefully lessons are learned. Guys play better, to the extent that fatigue from the New York trip was an issue. And I've actually had a lot of people tell me that is pretty legitimate in this case. Obviously, you have a whole week here to get past that. So let's go.
That was a quick turnaround. I didn't even think about that because it was a Friday game. It felt like a Saturday for some reason for me on Friday, so I didn't even.
Yeah, they didn't get in until 5 a.m. I guess that next day. So I kind of dismissed that initially, but I've actually had some people say no, it was actually
and especially
somewhat legitimate in this case.
It's the end of the semester too, so there's a lot going on.
Yep. Last question for you, Ryan. Any theories on all the upsets and close calls in college basketball?
I just think that there's more parity than ever. I mean, it sounds a really cheap thing to say, but it's so true. There just is. And here's the
numbers
deal.
back it up. Like, even if you look at the KenPom adjusted efficiency margins, they're all like closer together. There's usually a wider margin from the top to, whatever number you're going to look at. It's just clustered together more.
Here's the thing. 25 years ago, there were about 24 teams that regularly got their games on national television. Now every game is on national television somewhere. It's easier to recruit somewhere when you could say, hey, we're one of 24 teams that, has this game. You'll get exposure on national television. You'll get this, you'll get that you won't get at other schools. Well, you can't do that anymore. And so there are guys who, and also there's more highlighting of recruiting talent also. I mean, you've guys ranked into the 500s in recruiting rankings. I mean, in football, it goes into the 2000s. You're finding more talent. They're mining this talent that wouldn't have gotten a scholarship 20 years ago. So what you're seeing is a lot of schools invest in athletics, invest in player development, invest in those things. And you're seeing very low tier schools. You're seeing, 200 level teams with teams full of recruited players or transfers or whatever who've been at big schools. And you're also seeing those players then getting developed and getting to play on national television and being invested in the program, as opposed to maybe years ago, they would just it would almost be like a glorified rec team, So you're seeing just a depth of talent and a depth of coaching and a depth of development that you weren't seeing 20 years ago. And that's the difference, is that also these kids, instead of playing just their 30 high school games a year, they're playing 200 games a year, and they're playing in weird places. They're traveling all over the place. So when they have to travel to go on the road to North Carolina or something like that, they're used to traveling and playing. It's not like this is this odd, crazy thing to get to go, play in another state and face really good competition. They've been doing that in AAU for years. And so I just think that there's less of a curve that falls off after the top 50, 75 teams than there used to be. It's more of a steady, slow decline. And those teams on a good night can jump up and catch those top tier teams anytime. So I just think it's, if you're looking for why this didn't used to happen, that's why. It's that these kids are playing top tier basketball for years before they get the chance to play in college. Whereas they used to just play, when I was playing, we played our 30 high school games, and we played some travel games, but we played them around California. We never left the state to play basketball. And that was, 20 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And so this has completely changed the way that, people play basketball and the way that kids develop. And, so yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think the exposure these guys get at again, when a team goes into North Carolina, it's not like they're not used to being on TV. Every game they play is almost certainly on TV. So again, I just think that there's a lot of these kids are way more prepared for that kind of stuff than they were years ago. Where do you think the difference is?
Oh, I absolutely agree with everything you just said. I think you're spot on. I just think there's a lot more parity. I don't think the elite teams, quote unquote, by like the number next to their name in the rankings are as elite, and there's just not that big of a difference.
Well, and think about this: the teams that bring in like tons of 5-star players are typically expecting to lose most of those players after 1 year. So you have a bunch of talented, high-level freshmen who've never played together versus some of these smaller teams who are coming in with seniors and juniors who have played together for several years, who may be far less talented, but are
less
better
volatile,
but are better at playing together.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's that talent versus an actual team thing. And, you know, I'm surprised that we're surprised at some of the results, you know, when you think about it. Yeah. So, but that's why teams in the tournament, you know, that's why high talent teams with young players sometimes lose early in the tournament to lower level veteran teams, you know?
Yep. All right. I know you have to go Thursday, Assembly Call Radio. You and I will not be there, but we will be back Saturday for the IU Notre Dame postgame show.
Yeah, who's replacing us? We're getting
so I think Coach is hosting tentatively. Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast is scheduled to be on. I thought it would be good to get his insight on Fred Glass leaving. Hopefully Kroger does not have any sales on brisket or ribs between now and then.
Done.
And we'll get blown off so that he can cook and post about it on social media. Or maybe he'll make cookies. I don't know. Now we love Galen. I've actually learned a lot about cooking from him.
Oh, you have?
Hopefully. Well, yeah, he posts about it on social media all the time.
No, I mean, but you've used it instead of just entertainment. You've actually gathered.
Yeah, like I try to actually, you know, I try to learn something and use it.
How's it worked?
Fine. I mean,
you're doing well.
I'm not that good of a cook, so any tip that I can get, I'm very happy about.
I'm horrible, which is so funny because my mom is like writes cookbooks and is like this, you know, nationally famous cooking person. She's not.
Your mom and Galen should do a podcast together. Really I bet that would be an entertaining conversation.
They'll meet at the meetup.
Yeah.
So maybe worlds will be
just
colliding.
Put them in the corner. They can talk cooking.
Yeah. Talk brisket.
Yeah. We'll talk basketball. Okay, last question for you if you have time from Joel.
Sure.
He's going to see Archie today for the radio show. Do you have a question for him?
Compared to where you thought you'd be at this point of the year with how your team's playing defense, where are you? Like are you where you thought you'd be defensively? I think that's
he's going to say no. He's already said that over and over. Do you want to probe a little deeper?
Well,
like into the why?
What is the most? How about this? How about this? What is the most disappointing aspect of your defense right now?
Okay, that's good. I would actually be interested to ask him about the play at the end of regulation, and specifically, like when he looked over at the bench, were they trying to figure out like what are they going to do, or do they have a set strategy for whether to foul, whether or not that
like
they
the 2-point conversion card or something?
Yeah, but I just want to know, like, do they have something that they've practiced? Because it felt like there was some confusion there, and it seemed like he acknowledged that in his post game. I would just like to know the actual philosophy and if it's something they've specifically worked on for those moments, or if they were kind of caught with that as something they just hadn't installed yet.
That's a good one, Joel. You got 2 options.
Yep, 2 options. Absolutely. All right, man.
All right, buddy.
Should we talk Josh Allen now or later?
We'll save that. It just turned down to the fact that what we consider good. That's really the difference.
I know. That's funny, though, when you have a conversation, it's 20 tweets later, and you're like, oh, this is just a semantic difference. Okay. Good night.
Just wasted an hour of my life on this.
Okay, everybody. Coach, Andy, and hopefully Galen will be there with you on Thursday, and then Ryan, I'll be back to talk with you after the IU Notre Dame game.
Sounds good. Later, guys.
Yep. See y'all.